We lost 14 guys in Afghanistan. We lost 1 in Iraq. I've lost more being back in the States, 2010 to now. I've lost more from either suicide, drug over, whatever it is. Man, when I was getting out of the Corps, it's like you claim PTSD. Yo, you're like you weak-minded.
Yeah.
What are you? Anxiety, depression, hate, anger, all of these things. Like I've experienced all of that.
See, I never experienced combat, but I had the same situation when I went to the recruiters. Like, I am going to go into the infantry. I don't care what other jobs there are. That's just me. Now, did I think about like, hey, how is this transferable to the civilian sector? That wasn't in my mind at all. I was like, I'm going to go into the infantry, and I want to go to combat. I want to help serve and protect the country. I want to, support and defend the Constitution. I want to experience these things because some of the greatest human beings to ever walk the earth did that stuff before us. And I wanted to be able to be a part of that. And so like there was my at the time, there were some bonuses for like truck drivers and other things like that. And I was like, nope, I'm only going infantry. There's nothing else that you can convince me of. Like, that's it. And he's like, all right, man. Yeah, you're sure.
Did you not get a bonus?
No, I didn't get a bonus for enlisting. I
got a t-shirt.
Did you?
A red t-shirt that was like USMC in yellow. That was my bonus.
That was your bonus? Yeah. I got a bonus when I re-enlisted because at the time, when you were in the infantry, when you were re-enlisting as a sergeant, you rated a bonus for re-enlisting as a sergeant in the infantry because they were trying to retain a bunch of sergeants to get more squad leaders prepped for the fleet. But then they are also giving some small bonuses for the different various MOSs within the infantry. I don't know if 0311 was qualifying for, but 0352s did. 41s did, machine gunners did. So, unfortunately, I was an idiot.
351s, obsolete.
Obsolete. Well, see, that's the only downside. They didn't have the 51s thing. Kind of what they ended up doing with that. At least in 2018, when I was talking to the commandant, they were saying that they were going to try to empower company first sergeants with the ability to kind of like lat move them to 0311, so that way they would be promotable, but they wouldn't have to go back to school.
2018.
2018 was when I talked to the commandant.
That's 8 years. Okay, so you're just saying when okay, got it.
Yeah, that was 8 years after you got out, but that was like
because they implemented that in 2010. I couldn't even re-enlist as a 0351.
Yeah, but they still were producing 0351s up until I want to say like somewhere between 2014 and 2018. They were still producing them. Maybe it was maybe 2016 they stopped producing them. Possibly, I'm probably wrong on that, but I do know that there were still 0351s in the Corps in 2018 that were like trying to figure out what they could do to stay in because they wanted to, but they just couldn't stay in their MOS. So the way that they figured out how to do it was to like enable the company grade first sergeants to be able to like, hey, we can lat move you administratively to 0311 so you can re-enlist and then your cutting score would change, your zone would change and all that stuff. And they were trying to enable these guys to stay in because there's a lot of 51s that were very senior 51s because like they weren't able to be promoted for years because the MOS was closed out. Right. And so that was a thing too. But in any case, so no, I didn't get a bonus when I enlisted, but I didn't care. That wasn't why I did it.
That's not why I did it.
I was like, I want to shoot machine guns and missiles.
Yeah.
I want to be in the infantry. I want to have that experience because I thought at the time that it would, because I didn't have much. I mean, I had some life experience, but I'd never, I don't know if I had really good leadership experience just yet because I hadn't really been exposed to that. And I just knew that there were some incredible individuals out there that had served in the Marine Corps infantry that went on to do some unbelievably incredible things. I mean, like the founder of FedEx was in the Marine Corps. A bunch of like Fortune 500 companies have like Marines running them. The CEO of Black Rifle Coffee Company right now is a Marine. Yep. There's a lot of very successful Marines out there that are out there hooking and jabbing still in the private sector, and they're doing very well. Representing the private industry, the private sector, and being ambassadors of like the former Marine kind of thing, even though you're Marine for life, right? Corps. Representing the Corps, being like, hey, these are productive professional individuals and stuff like that.
And you've got those ones, and then you also have
other ones that may
total
may
opposite side as well. Yeah,
you have both sides of the spectrum because like not
I've
everybody.
Got some of those.
Sure.
And all that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, and some people transition out and they decide they just want to be a cop. They just want to be in law enforcement, or maybe some guys end up getting out and they just go do private security for guys. I know dudes that did that. I know guys that moved over to the Army after they were in the infantry for a little bit because they wanted to do something different.
A couple of mine, man, they went and raised money, became mercenaries, went back overseas to fight.
Yeah, I have.
Because that's just their life, man. They could not have normal life back in the States.
Yeah, see, that's different for us, though, for my peer group specifically, because at least for 3rd Marines, like the last time 2-3 deployed to combat was 2011 for the Battle of Marja. And that was like after that Battle of Marja, they came back, or actually, sorry, they deployed in 2010, came back in 2011, I believe. I think it was like December of 2010 they left, and then they came back in the summer of 2011, and that was during the Battle of Marja, or Garmshire. Yeah, but anyway, they came back from that, and then that was the last time they deployed to combat as a battalion. After that, going forward, they did nothing but the unit deployment program to Okinawa and PACOM and stuff like that. So most of my peer group never experienced combat. I still haven't myself personally, even after like being in the infantry for 5 years. So a lot of those guys, I know some dudes that got out of the Marine Corps and volunteered for the Foreign Legion in Ukraine to go fight over there. And some of them got shot and came back to the States and recovered. Like some of the guys that I served with, because they never got the experience, which is they wanted to experience combat. And so they never got that because, that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes, man. Like you don't get to pick where you deploy. You don't get to pick where you're going. You don't get to pick what your deployment looks like.
Where you're stationed.
Or where you're stationed or any of that, or what unit you go to. It's just like, hey, this is where you're going. And we're like, check, cool, that's where we're going. And so a lot of guys felt like, for my peer group, a lot of guys felt like their service didn't mean anything because they never got to do their job. They just trained to go train. Because when we went to PACOM, we were training out there. We were like training with partner force. We're doing impactful things. Like we're training with our partner force, training with the Japanese self-defense force, training with the South Korean Marines, training with the Thais, training with the Filipinos, the Malaysians, the Indonesians, like all these guys. Sometimes some of the folks had the opportunity to train with the Aussies. Or the New Zealanders and all these other people, but they didn't get to actually go to combat and do their job in combat. So they felt like it's like, a lot of these guys, they felt like they didn't do anything and their service didn't really mean anything, or they didn't have the credibility.
I feel like that is just part of being in the service because I could say the same thing. Like we went to Iraq 07, 08. Right. I was in Ramadi. At that time, it was a little bit more humanitarian.
Yeah.
We were given out, food sometimes, but it was more or less training Iraqi army and Iraqi police so that way they could take over their city and that way we could get out, right?
Yeah.
Help form their democracy.
Different than 06.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely different. We did pop shots, IEDs, but mostly Iraqi army and police were going after each other, right?
Okay.
So there was very little combat in Iraq when I was there.
Yeah.
I did see a big change. In that 7 months, I saw a big change and I saw huge help. But you fast forward, 15 years after that, I'm looking and watching the news and I see that ISIS takes over JSS Malab. Well, JSS Malab is exactly where I was in Ramadi.
No kidding.
Right? So like everything that we did, and then, so I was at JSS Malab and then we went to Euphrates River, forward operating base down there, built a new one, but like all of that got taken back over.
Yeah.
So you're saying like, hey, the guys that you served with, like, what did we do? Man, I saw an impact and I saw a change, but then ISIS came back and took everything back over.
Yeah.
So, and that was just Iraq.
I will say, like, since then, obviously Afghanistan is a completely different story. That's a whole nother can of worms. I don't know if that's a completely different can of worms, but like, my first time getting to go to a quote unquote combat zone because I was getting imminent danger pay and hazardous duty pay. That's the only reason, because a combat zone is considered a combat zone only when you're receiving imminent danger pay and hazardous duty pay. I was receiving that, so that's why I referred to it as that, even though there wasn't any combat going on.
Yep.
And it's just arbitrary. I still didn't experience combat, but anyway, the first time I got to go to CENTCOM was when I was no longer in the infantry. I wasn't even in the infantry anymore. I was out there on an independent duty assignment, like an individual augment to the Combined Special Operations Joint Task Force Levant. And what we were doing is partner force development with the Syrians. Specifically, we were focusing on counter ISIS stuff, right? And at the time, we were also very heavily involved in Iraq. And since since the resurgence of ISIS happened, we fought back with our partner forces and supporting them. And they've pushed ISIS like out a lot. Like at this point now, it's gotten back to a much better place than it was before. And I've been seeing a lot of videos and pictures coming up of the Iraqi counterterrorism guys who have done significant work to push back ISIS. And I mean, ISIS has gotten pushed back like very heavily in Iraq, and like they've taken back a lot of the things that you saw fall after you guys had just done all this work. So I think it's good to see that like at least some of the stuff that happened in Iraq at least has had a positive impact, and that it's a little bit more sustainable. Is there still a lot of inherent danger? Yes, of course, but a lot of that, like, we went in there for OIF and then like kind of stabilized it, and then ISIS came in, destabilized it, and then like in coordination with NATO forces and the partner forces, they restabilized it after it had been destabilized. So it's been very tumultuous for sure. But one of the things that I have at least seen over the past few years is seeing that like the results of the U.S. training the Iraqis to protect their own country from extremism and stuff like that has had an impact. Yeah, so that's nice to see that there's been some sort of a positive impact from that. Now, that being said, obviously Fallujah is still probably not the safest city. Ramadi is still probably not the safest city. There's still pockets of like the Islamic Caliphate in different areas that are doing things. But for the most part, the Iraqi like government forces have most of the stuff a little bit more under control than it was before. Obviously, Syria is a whole nother complicated thing, very different, lot of different people operating over there. Iran having an impact on everything, of course, because they're like the biggest sponsor, like state sponsor of terrorism. But anyway, that bottom line is like getting back to it. A lot of my peer group didn't feel like they did anything because we never went to Iraq or Afghanistan like in 2-3 because the last time they deployed to combat was Marja in 2010, and so they a lot of my peer group just felt like their service didn't matter. They didn't get to actually do their job. Even like, and it got to the point where there's so little combat rotations or even combat deployments, quote unquote, because like the only people that were actually going to either Iraq or Afghanistan was like 8th Marines and East Coast units, East Coast grunt units. Even though like all of Pendleton, most of those guys were going to Indo-PACOM stuff too. Yeah. But, and even like our platoon sergeants did a good job of explaining like, hey, look, don't be super envious and jealous of your peers in 8th Marines and all these guys, because like they're just going over there and standing post. They're not going out on combat patrols. They're not going out there like liberating villages and stuff like that. They're just kind of maintaining during the drawdown, because like at the time 2014 we were already starting to like really draw down troop numbers in Afghanistan and kind of pulling back from places. And so like a lot of the guys I knew that went to Afghan in like 2014, 15, 16 weren't really doing a lot. The folks that went to Iraq in 2014, 15, 16 when ISIS was back, some of those guys were seeing some things because it was kind of crazy at the time during that resurgence. But most of that stuff was it wasn't the same thing as it was in like 2003 Iraq. It was just not the same. And every generation has their own like internal mental struggle, and a lot of it probably just comes down to like self-worth. Like, how was my service valuable? Did I actually have an impact? Because people want to feel like what they did mattered. People want to feel like their service meant something, that they've had an impact on that area. They want to feel like, in comparison with my peers, how was my career? And we're always comparing ourselves to each other in the military. I mean, there's good thing in like competition breeds excellence. Like that's a good thing. I get that. But constantly comparing yourselves to others also like we talked about, comparison's the thief of joy. Yep. It really does happen a lot with the military, especially because we have to have this competitive environment to get the best of the best to be out there when it is 100% needed. When we are needed, we need the best people out there doing the work, because that's the only way you're going to win. And so I get that piece, but it just inherently, part of that is people end up comparing themselves to each other all the time. And then everybody's measuring their they're phallic objects. You know what I mean? So it's just like it becomes
whipping
an issue.
it out. Yeah.
So we have a lot of mental health issues, and that's not one of them. I was talking to a guy the other day. Tyler Gray is his name, and he used to be a Delta Force operator. Guy got injured during the global war on terror, and now he's like full on invested in like veterans' mental health, and like that's a big thing with him now. But he says everything stems back to self-worth. Any issue that you see in the military that has to do with mental health, he said it all leads back to this one main tributary of self-worth, and a lot of that comes from. A lot of your self-worth is determined by the way that you were raised when you were a kid, the things that happened to you when you were in your early developmental years, like whether or not you had your parents, whether or not your parents were married, like what your relationship was like with your family and that kind of stuff. And so, people coming from all walks of life, you're going to have a wide variation of like what people's experiences were prior to the military. And even though we have an indoctrinational period for the pipelines, like you're still bringing some of your baggage with you because you're going to be like, wherever you go, there you are. You know what I'm saying? You're taking yourself with you, even if like you become a new sailor, Marine, soldier, airman, Coast Guardsman, whatever. And so like, it is kind of what it is. It's kind of the nature of the beast. Now, just because we're never going to reduce the fatalities as a result of self-injury to zero, just because we're never going to bring that to zero, doesn't mean we shouldn't always continue to try, which we should.
Yes.
And that's the key. As long as we keep attacking it, then it will at least, because it's like a boat that's sinking constantly, but you got a bucket. You can constantly throw water out. You got to keep throwing the water out. Like the water's going to keep coming in.
We still got to do our part.
You still got to do your part, man.
Absolutely.
You still got to bail the boat.
Yep.
You still got to bail out the boat,
Talk about
man.
like self-harm and stuff. Like we lost 14 guys in Afghanistan. We lost 1 in Iraq. I've lost more being back in the States, 2010 to now. I've lost more from either suicide, drug overdose, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, because mental health was, man, when I was getting out of the Corps, it's like you claim PTSD, you're like you weak-minded.
Yeah.
What are you?
Yeah.
You're not a man.
It's a real problem.
That's how it was.
It's a real problem.
And then I look, man, 15 years later, and I look at really the last 15 years of my life has been crazy. The last 10 has.
Yeah.
But it's like all of that we went through and stuff growing up, like all of your childhood, it makes you who you are.
Yeah.
Marine Corps made me who I am. But I can either do one of two things. I can either dwell on the past and just like mope about it and say, man, all of this stuff happened to me, this bad stuff, blah, blah, blah. My friends are killing themselves, alcoholic, drugs, whatever. Or I can say, man, I'm going to make a difference and a change, be able to open up about my past experiences so that way one person can hear it. And if you're struggling with alcohol, man, there's freedom. There is freedom from that.
Yeah. There's liberation from that.
There is. From anxiety, depression, hate, anger, all of these things. Like I've experienced all of that.
Yeah.
And there is freedom. My freedom was found in God, right?
Yeah.
That's what changed my life.
Yeah.
I had God growing up from the day I was born until now. But my relationship with God